We're going to be talking about things offered to idols tonight. And you're thinking, well, that's not our problem. We don't believe in idols and we don't offer things to idols. And so we're just going to have to, I guess, endure this part, but not really. What Paul is going to do, he's going to talk about this, but he's going to bring up some very important spiritual principles that we can apply to things today. And that's where we'll want to concentrate. You know, it's one thing to know better, and it's another thing to feel better, isn't it? I mean, you might know. I think of a humorous illustration on the Andy Griffith Show when Barney, he says, I'm not superstitious. I'm not superstitious. I'm just cautious. See, he knew better, but he didn't feel better. And there's a lot of things like that people struggle with. I want you to imagine growing up in Corinth, and all your life you've been immersed in idolatry. I think that's the ruins of a temple to Apollo. I think that's who it was. I took that picture when I was in Corinth. I mean, those things were everywhere. And one of the ways you would worship is meats would be brought to Apollo, animals sacrificed, and they were kind of like the butcher. Well, they divide the meat up and cut it all up and sell it out there in the marketplace. And so you didn't just decide, I just want a steak tonight, but I want an Apollo steak tonight, or I really need Zeus. I'm going to get a Zeus steak tonight and eat that meat in honor of that god. And not only that, there would be things like maybe the Workers Guild you're with. Well, they're having the feast to Apollo. Go right in the temple, and they would serve the meat right there in the temple. Now, you're a Christian. What about all that? Can you participate in that? And you may have heard, well, there's nothing to idols, but just because you know it doesn't mean you don't feel like, yeah, but I don't know, I'm going to be cautious. So that's the kind of situation that's going on in Corinth. Let's look at this. We're looking at problems and questions in Corinth. And the question we're looking at now are, what about things offered to idols? And I want you to watch for the spiritual principles that Paul is going to dwell on. He's going to talk about knowledge and liberty and love. And then he's going to talk about forbearance and use himself as an example of forbearance. And then he's going to warn them, you better be careful. There is a great appeal to all this idolatry, and you might think you stand, but you may fall. And then he's going to give some very practical advice, and I'm going to carry this all the way over to chapter 11 and verse 1. I think that really goes with this discussion. I think you'll agree with me about meats that have been offered to idols. So let's get into this. He starts off, knowledge, liberty, and love. Number one, love needs to accompany knowledge. Number two, we're going to talk about what those who have knowledge know. But we're also going to talk about what those who lack knowledge think. And we've got to consider that. And he's going to answer their question and then explain the answer. So let's get into this part. Knowledge. Now, as touching things offered unto idols, 1 Corinthians 8:1. We know that we all have knowledge. Now, we all know this. We know this. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. You've heard this expression. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Sometimes people think they know a little something, and they think they know everything because they know a little bit. So knowledge can, just because you know, you might get kind of puffed up. But charity is when you're looking out after the goods of others. And that's what builds up. So if any man think he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. You might know something, but you don't know everything you need to know. And so if any man love God, the same is known of him. So you got a little knowledge, and you think you know, but it's kind of like you ain't seen nothing yet. There's a lot more to this than just what you know. It's concerning things whereof eating those things that are offered in sacrifice to idols. We know an idol's nothing. That's what we know. So we're talking about what those who have knowledge know. We know an idol, that's nothing. There is no God behind that idol. There's only one God. We know an idol's nothing in the world. There's none other God but one. For though there'll be those called gods, whether they're in heaven and on earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but there's one God. Now we know this. The Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we in him. Okay, we know that there's nothing to this idolatry. But what about those who lack knowledge? What do they think? Well, there is not in every man that knowledge. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. It's just meat, and an idol's nothing. But there's some that, boy, if they eat that meat, they say, you know, this is Apollo steak. And their conscience just not letting them do that. So, let's answer the question. Meat commendeth us not to God. There's nothing to it. It's just meat, okay? It's meat. It's not whether you take the meat and it helps you or it hurts you, either one. For it is neither. If we eat, are we the better? Neither if we eat, are we the worse. But take heed, lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. And so the answer explained. If any man see thee that has knowledge sit at meat in the idol's temple. See, you could go right into the temple and eat meat right there. It's kind of like maybe going to the restaurant. Maybe they didn't have restaurants. Maybe they just had meats in these temples. It's lunch time to eat. You go to the temple and get your meat. What if somebody sees you do that? What are they going to think? Well, there's nothing to it. There's nothing to the God. There is no God in that temple, and that it's just a piece of meat. But if any man see thee that has knowledge sit at meat in an idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things that are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? I mean, he sees you doing it. Well, he's lead singing down at church. He's doing it. I guess I can do it too. When you're thinking it'd be wrong to do it, well, you so sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. That's what you need to know. Your brother's more important than your sandwich, see? And so if you sin against your brother, you're sinning against Christ. Wherefore, if meat make my brother offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. That offend means to stumble. If it's going to cause a brother to stumble and do something that would violate his conscience, I'm just not going to have it. I won't do it. Now, he's talking about here, I'm going to forbear the eating of meats. And so the subject's going to shift a little bit now to forbearance. Let's go to the next chapter. Paul's going to set himself up as an example of forbearance. It's going to work this way. He's going to emphasize, now I'm an apostle. As an apostle, I've got rights. And I defend my right to financial support, but I don't exercise that right. See, I forbear. I don't take your money. I don't take your financial support. And he admonishes them, now you've got liberties, but you need to control yourself and be temperate in how you exercise your liberties. Let's look how this works. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not ye my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle to others, yea, doubtless I am to you, for the seal of my apostleship are you in the Lord. They know he's an apostle. And if anybody ought to know, the people at Corinth, well, he'd worked with them a year and a half, and they know he's an apostle. So, my answer for them that do examine me is this: have we not power to eat and drink? You think a man can be an apostle and he doesn't have to eat and drink anything? He's still got to live, doesn't he? He's got to find something to eat. He's got to be able to drink. And what about a wife? Have we not power? That's a liberty. Maybe you think that. Listen, because I'm an apostle, is that all right? Does that mean I can't get married? Have we not power to lead about a sister or wife as well as other apostles and as the brethren of the Lord? And Cephas, now that's Peter. You know, Peter did have a wife. Remember, he had a mother-in-law? Now that's how you get a mother-in-law. So you get a wife and you get a mother-in-law right with it. So he had a wife. In fact, he was an elder in the church. And an elder is supposed to be the husband of one wife. So Peter had a wife. You think I can't? I've got that power. I could have a wife just like Peter could. I have the authority. I have the liberty to do this. And what about me and Barnabas? Have not we power to forbear working? Listen, what if Paul made tents in Corinth. Remember that? But he didn't have to. I didn't have to go out and make tents. See, I could have charged you all. You all could support me, and I could take your support instead of having to go out here and make tents all this time when I was with you. So I have the power. That's what he's talking about. But what about a soldier? Well, when he goes to warfare at any time at his own charges, you don't expect a soldier to go out there and just do it at his own charges. Soldiers get their pay. What about the vine dresser who planteth a vineyard and eateth not of the fruit thereof? What about a shepherd? He who feedeth the flock and eateth not the milk of the flock. These things I say as a man, or saith not the law the same also? I'm not just saying this. Look, the old law had this principle in it. What about the ox? He said, it's written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth not God take care of the oxen? The oxen would tread on the corn to separate that wheat from the chaff. And the oxen, as he's walking around, well, the oxen can eat some of it. So you got the soldier and the vine dresser and the shepherd and the ox. We're going to have some more. Or saith it all together for our sakes. For our sakes, no doubt, this is written. What about the plowman? He that ploweth should plow in hope. What about the man that thresheth? He that thresheth in hope should be partakers of his hope. And then what about the sower? If we have sown into you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we reap carnal things? You see, the preacher should be able to expect financial remuneration for his work. That's what Paul is talking about. And then he says, if others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? He could have partaken of that. He said, look, I'm preaching to you. You need to support me. And he could have done that. But then the latter part of verse 12, nevertheless, we've not used this power. He had the liberty to do it, but he didn't do it. But we suffer all things lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. Now, what about those that minister about holy things? Go back to Jerusalem. There were the Levites that kind of took care of everything. They cleaned up the temple and cleaned up the mess. They weren't the priest, but what about them? Well, those that minister about holy things live of the things of the temple. Yeah, they didn't do all that for nothing. They had to eat and drink and have clothing and have shelter, so they're serving the temple, but they get to live off the temple finances. They which wait at the altar are partakers of the altar. That's the priest. Well, you've got all these people that are doing this work, and we take care of them financially. Even so the Lord hath ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. And so that's the justification, isn't it? For paying your preacher. What you're doing, you're You're supporting him so he can do that work. But then he says, "Why I didn't do that." Now I had the power to, but I decided I'm not going to do that. He said, "I've used none of these things. Neither have I written these things that it should be done so unto me, for it were better for me to die than that any man should make my glory in void." He said, "I'm not writing this to get you to start paying me. That's not what I'm doing. And if you did, it would mess up the point. I'm glorying in the Lord, and I don't want to foul that up. I'm not writing this because I think you owe me anything." He says, "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. Necessity is laid upon me, yea, woe is me if I preach not the gospel. For I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will a dispensation of the gospel is committed to me, whether I want to do it or not, that's what God's charged me to do. And I enjoy doing it. I'm doing it willingly. But even if I didn't really want to do it, God still is expecting this out of me. I'm going to preach the gospel, and I'm going to forego any remuneration that you would give me. What is my reward then? Here it is. Verily, that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel." We have liberties, and there is a legitimate exercise of those liberties. But if we're not careful, we can abuse liberties. So, though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself a servant in all, that I might gain the more. And to the Jews I became a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. And to them that are under the law is under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them without the law is without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them without law. Look, when I'm with the Jews, I'm going to live like the Jews. I'm not going to offend and isolate the Jews. I'm trying to reach them with the gospel. When I'm with the Gentiles, I'm not going to sit here and talk about my Judaism. I'll be like the Gentiles then. I'm not interested in them coming like me. I'm interested in winning their souls for Christ. And to the weak, I became as weak that I might gain the weak. What's he talking about? Those that think, I just don't think it's going to be right for me to eat that meat. And Paul's going to say, well, I'm not going to eat it either. That's what he's saying. And it says, I made all things to all men, that by all means I might win some. Just because we have a right doesn't mean we ought to exercise that right. Paul is more interested in the souls of those he's working with than he is of making sure that they know what my rights are. And so I do this for the gospel's sake, that I might be partakers thereof with you. And we need to be temperate. That means we control ourselves. We're the masters of ourselves. And we need to bring that under control. Know ye not they which run a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that you may obtain. And every man that striveth for mastery is temperate in all things. William Baker can tell us about that. He does all that walking. You know, you got to dedicate a lot to that. What you eat, how you spend your time, how much exercise. And he's got to control himself in all these things if he's going to be able to perform in the contest or whatever it is. He's temperate in all things. Paul's work is the gospel. And so everything else conforms to what I've got to do to be able to be a good preacher of the gospel. I'm temperate then in all these other things. Now, they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as in certainty, so I fight, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I preach to others, I myself should become a castaway. Paul has told us here, look, you have an example in me of one that does not exercise his rights, an example of forbearance for a benefit of others. And that's how you need to be about eating things offered to idols. But this last part, he says, lest I myself should become a castaway. He's going to warn them. Some of them had come out of idolatry, and they think, well, I know now an idol's nothing. I can eat this meat. However, there's still a great appeal to this idolatry. You start going in their temple, eating their meat in their temple, you might not be as strong as you think you are. You could be sucked back into this idolatry quicker than you think. And so he's going to warn them, look, don't be proud. Pride goeth before destruction, and the Holy Spirit before fall. And maybe you ought to stay away from this. Here's how he does it. Take heed lest you fall. Chapter 10. Paul warns apostasy is possible, and Paul admonishes them to just avoid the temptation. Moreover, brethren, chapter 10, verse 1, I would not that you should be ignorant how all our fathers were under the cloud and passed through the sea, and were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all did eat the same spiritual meat, and all did drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Talking about the Jews coming out of Egypt. But with many of them God was not well pleased. What happened to them? They were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples. That's what he's going. Here's an example. Look at all these folks that got out of Egypt, but look what happened to them. Lust, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Idolatry. Neither be ye idolaters, as some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. It had to do with that golden calf, remember? What about fornication? Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed and fell one day 23,000. That's right at the borders of the promised land. That lust, that idolatry, that fornication, that's all associated with pagan worship. And that's what they had come out of in Corinth. Now, neither let us tempt Christ. Just see how close I can get. I'm going to see. I know it's wrong, but I'm not going to go. I'll just go this close. I'm going to see how close I can get. No, don't do that. Neither tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed as serpents. Neither murmur ye. Now, let's quit complaining about this. Neither murmur ye, as some of them murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now, all these things happened as examples. And they're written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Therefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Okay, you know an idol's nothing. And you know it's just meat. But don't get puffed up. Pride cometh before destruction. You might get over there and start mingling with all those idolaters, worshipers, and you may not be as strong as you think you are. And maybe you ought to forbear. What you need to do is just avoid the temptation. Let's go to the next. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation make a way to escape, that you may bear it. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge ye what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? That is. When we're taking the Lord's Supper, this is our communion with Christ. He says, the bread we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? Yes, it is, when we take the Lord's Supper. We're worshiping with Christ. Remember how Christ said, I'll not eat it with you till I eat it with you new in the kingdom. And that's what we're doing. We're partaking of this memorial with Christ. We're being made of one bread and one body, for we're all partakers of that one bread. Behold, Israel after the flesh. Are not they which eat the sacrifices partakers of the altar? Yeah, that's what the Jews did. They would bring their meat to Jehovah. The priest would offer it, and then they would eat that meat that had been offered to Jehovah. They'd sit down with the priest and eat it with the priest. Well, what shall I say then? That an idol is anything? No, an idol's not anything. Or that which is offered in sacrifice to idol is anything? No, that's not anything. We know that. We know that. However, this I say, the things with the Gentile sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils. That's in their mind, and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of the devils. If we provoke the Lord to jealousy, are we stronger than he? You know, you get over into that and you're thinking, well, I took the Lord's Supper on Sunday. Now Monday I'm going to eat Apollo steak with the worshipers of Apollo. And you might know better, but you may not feel better. You better be careful about whether you're trying to worship two gods at the same time, see? And he says, I'm going to give you some practical advice. Here's what you need to do. Matter of things offered to idols. Number one, recognize everything's not expedient. Be mindful of others. Do not overinflate the issue. You know, some people just want to cause trouble over stuff. Don't do things make for peace. Don't make this too hard. Said, be willing to forego your liberty. Do what will bring God glory. Don't be unnecessarily offensive. Sometimes we offend without trying, but try not to be offensive. And follow my example. Here's how we do it. First, all things are not expedient. 1 Corinthians 10:23. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Just because it's lawful doesn't mean I ought to do it. Just because I have a right to do it doesn't mean I need to exercise that right. Is that going to build up my brother? That's what edifying is. Just because I can do it, you need to know this. You need to do what builds your brother up and not leads him into temptation. And then be mindful of others. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. That doesn't mean I'm trying to get your money. It means this. I'm trying to help my brother be rich in spiritual things. That's what I want. Don't overinflate the issue. You can just see this happening, can't you? Whatever is sold in the shambles, that eat, ask no questions for conscience sake. Don't go down there and buy meat and say, now, I want that, but now was that offered to Apollo? Just don't even ask. Don't even ask that. Just don't bring it up. He says, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If any of them but leave not, bid you to a feast, and you be disposed to go, whatever set before you eat. Ask no question for conscience sake. They invite you over to eat, and they put the meat on your plate. Don't say, well now, was this offered to an idol? You know it doesn't matter. Don't cause trouble over this that's not necessary. He said, and be willing to forego. If any man say to you, this is offered in sacrifice to idols, just don't eat it for conscience sake that showed it. I mean, it's not that it would have been wrong to eat it, but if it's a big deal that it's offered to idols, just say, well, I'd rather not have any tonight. Just don't eat it. It says, for conscience sake, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Think about the conscience, not just your own, but what about the conscience of the other? And do something to bring God's glory. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. And don't be unnecessarily offensive. Give none offense, neither to Jews nor the Gentiles nor to the church of God. And follow my example. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Be ye followers of me, as I also am of Christ. You see how that first verse of chapter 11 just fits with what all we've been saying. You see, the spiritual principles are more important than the issue at hand. Here they are: knowledge, love, liberty, forbearance, pride that goes before destruction, temptation that you could put yourself into, and follow things that make for peace. Well, do we have anything like that going on today? Well, we did this afternoon. We were in town. We said, let's get the car washed. So we drove through the car wash, and a lot of time we go through the car wash and then vacuum it out. I said, you want to vacuum it out? And Laura says, no, not on Sunday. Well, there's nothing wrong with vacuuming a car on Sunday, but she said my grandmother used to put her sewing machine up on Sunday. She wouldn't even sew on Sunday. We're not going to get out there in front of everybody and be cleaning that car out on Sunday. Okay, we know better than that, don't we? We know, but it may not feel better. That's the way I am about mowing my yard on Sunday. I'm just not going to do it. I know it's not wrong, but I just don't feel good about doing that. So I'm bringing up some trivial examples. Some people have things that are not so trivial, and yet it falls under these principles, and it's these spiritual principles that we use in working with others. We're trying to help each other. Now, a lot of these things, people can outgrow them. See, they're kind of hung up about some of these issues, but I tell you, over time, you mature, you grow, and what might be a real problem can later come up, that's really not a problem, and just don't make big deals of it. But as we're helping each other grow, as we edify one another, we need to love one another and think more of the spiritual health of the others than we do of our own rights. And that's what Paul is talking about here, and things offered to idols. You see what a good lesson that is? Even though that particular issue isn't our issue, those spiritual principles, they still apply, and we need to learn how to apply them. So with that, I'm going to offer the invitation. We need to glorify God in all we do. We need to be baptized into Christ. We need to live for Him. We set Christ first, and if anything is going to hinder our ability to be effective as tools in God's hands to the spread and acceptance of the gospel, just don't, it's not worth it. Don't do that. Put that out of the way, so that will not be a problem. If anyone needs to respond to the invitation tonight, you can do it while we stand and sing.